It's forgivable the first time.
Yeah, you don't know any better.
Hey, it's a little bit past 7:30. I apologize for the late start. We were just waiting to get a quorum, so we have a quorum now. Thanks for being here at this morning's governing board meeting. We have a few fun things to look at this morning. We need to do an election to select a chair and a vice chair. We also have a couple of really interesting proposals and presentations that we'll look at as well today. So we'll move ahead. First off, at our last governing board meeting, we showed the photos from our annual photo contest. So at the back of the room, and a number of you requested to have one of these prints put in your offices. So we have those prints, and Sam, if you could stand up, we'll help divvy those out so you can bring them back to your office. You'll be excited to hear that when we ordered them, we ordered a fairly normal size. They came at least a third bigger than we were expecting. So you have a gorgeous large print to bring back to the office. You can see that there were 3 popular ones. So we're excited that those were selected. We had a couple awards that we wanted to give out, but our past chair, our 2 past chairs, Mayor Wilson and Mayor Hadfield, were not available to come today, so we will hold off on those. There's a chance that we might bring Mayor Hadfield's to his home. His health is not great right now, and so we would love to get that to him sometime in the near future, and we will invite Mayor Wilson to our March meeting to see if he can attend that. He's been since replaced, so but we loved his service. Both of them served, I think, since the commission began. Very deserving of some recognition for that. So first off, I will conduct the first portion of the meeting until we have elected a chair, and then we will turn that time over to our new chair. So first off, we have a consent agenda before you. If you could approve that agenda, that would be great. Can we get a...
I'll move that we approve the consent agenda.
Okay, do we have a second on that? Second. Thank you. And so first on the agenda is to nominate a chair. We have, at our executive committee meeting, we had 2 nominations come in. We had Mark C. Strand, Councilmember C. Strand, was nominated. We spoke with him, and he's ready and willing. And we also had Nathan Ivy, Commissioner Ivy, with the county, nominated. Do we have any other nominations that we would like to consider?
Just chair.
This is for just chair. So this is chair and vice chair, but we're going to work, we'll assign our chair first, and then we'll hold a second for our vice chair.
So I'd be willing to put in also for either one. I've been on the board for a while now. We're very involved. We've got 3, almost 4 marinas coming into our city, so we're heavily invested in the lake as well as Saratoga Springs.
Awesome.
So I'd throw in as well.
Okay. Any other nominations? So, how would you, we've considered how we could do it, our election. How would we like to, we just want to do it by raising hands? Does that work?
And I'm fine either way. Chair, vice chair, or neither.
Commissioner Ivy, you're right up here, up to my right. Okay, so for chair, all those in favor of, and we've already announced your name by the way. Sorry. All those in favor of, we'll start with Commissioner Ivy by a raise of hands. For chair. For chair. You can vote for yourself. In favor of Councilmember C. Strand. And in favor of Councilmember Barch. Okay, we have a chair. And So we will do a vice chair position. So the vice chair typically acts as the vice chair for a year and then normally becomes the chair. Previously that was Robin Pearson, but Robin Pearson won't be around next year, so this is why we're electing him. So for vice chair, all those in favor of Commissioner Ivy? All those in favor of Mark Seastrand? Mark Seastrand, thank you. Okay.
Where do you want us? What is next to you? Do you want us where we're at?
Typically, the chair would sit
Okay. I'll just
that
stay
end.
here.
If you're happy there, you can come up here, wherever.
Then. That's really fine.
So, do you have a agenda?
I do indeed. That's right. Okay, very good. Thank you very much for being here today. We have governing board minutes from November 16th. I'll take a motion on that if we're ready.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Financial reports. We've got the November through January financial reports that we had in our packet for review. If anybody has any questions? Eric, do you have anything you need to tell us specifically on those?
Nothing out of the ordinary. We'll talk about a couple of the items further in the agenda. So.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, I'll take a motion on the monthly financials.
So moved.
Thank you very much. Got a first, second? Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent, let's move on. Executive Director reports. Judge Eden.
Okay, so I'll go through the report real quick.
Thank you.
So the Utah Lake State Park is in process of being dredged right now. It is, I'm told, about 15% complete. The estimated date of completion, end of May, and that is pending the additional funding arriving. So there has been an internal request from state parks to receive an additional $500,000 so that they can do the dredge portion that is currently being dredged about 2 feet down, an additional 2 feet. The majority of that material right now is being placed into Campground Loop A. They diked it off and they're piling it in there, but they don't think that they have room in there for the additional 2 feet. And so they needed a little additional funding to help them both with the dredging and with the cost of hauling that material. But we're excited that it is moving ahead. Geneva Rock is the contractor on that, and we're told that they, as well as one of our water ski association, when their video camera is up, are recording this so that we should have some really cool time-lapse photography on the dredge project. So it'll be the entire inner harbor and then the channel all the way out to the lake that gets dredged down, cleaned out, so there's no obstacles. They extend the boat ramps a few feet so that our sailors can get their really tall trailers in and out without pulling axles off. So it should be a really great project, especially in a year like this where we're expecting a slightly lower lake level than normal. So
Eric, how far out into the lake are they planning on continuing that channel?
they won't go into the lake at
Not
all,
into the lake
from what I
at all.
understand. There's a coffer dam right in that inlet, and so they will go to about there. They might do a little bit of cleanup right next to that as they pull it out, but they will just go from the channel to that inlet where they have de-watered the entire channel. So you can see that in this photo where they're most of the way there. This is the most recent. It's hard to do. They're not having people come into the park right now while they work, so this is the best photo we've had for it. But yeah, there's no water in the park right now.
Question, how frequently do you have to dredge? So is it every 10 years? Or I'm assuming it's not a one-time thing. You have to.
It's not a one-time thing, but I think that this is a more extensive dredge than they've done for years and years and years. So this one, because the harbors are semi-protected from wave action, there's not a lot of deposit coming in out of the water. Since pioneer times, the expect for Erica, you probably know better than I, but what I've been told is that there's probably about 1.5 foot of sediment buildup since the pioneers arrived. So it's not happening at a high rate.
Okay.
Sometimes
It'll be higher in those deposition areas, right?
the mouths of the rivers, yeah. So it shouldn't need to take place too often. However, on the north end of the lake, I know that they've dredged a number of times for the Provo River or for the Jordan River canal systems. But a lot of that has been making sure that their intakes are deep enough in the lake that they can draw water.
Hey, anything else on the dredging? Move on to phragmites removal then.
So Phragmites work is moving ahead well this year. We started just before Christmas on smashing, and the smashing began in the Powell Slough area along the western side of Orem. That entire section has been completed. We've had reports from some of the folks in Vineyard that they're loving their new view. And in addition to the Phragmites smashing, we've also had our county crews down at the lake along that shoreline, removing some of the other invasives like tamarisk and Russian olives. And so it's really opening that up along the shoreline there, which we're excited about. They've now moved down into Provo Bay, and they are working kind of from this corner out towards the airport. And we were able to get an additional 20,000 from Division of Wildlife Resources on top of our watershed grant to extend an extra 250 acres with our current contractor. So that should be complete here in the next probably month and a half or so.
So I'm going to ask a lot of ignorant questions.
Please do.
With smashing, how long is that effective for? How frequently do you have to do that in the same place?
That is a fantastic question. So right now, USU, Dr. Karen Kettenring, has come out with some new research that tells us that we need to aggressively treat for about 3 years. So we will come in each fall that our county public works contracts with a helicopter pilot to fly on the chemical. So they fly on the chemical in around August. And then each year we will be smashing, or we hope to be smashing this entire portion. Not just what you see here, but it starts in Provo Bay, it wraps right up around the lake and goes down to Saratoga Springs. So it's about 4,000 acres of existing phragmites that we'll be treating every year for 3 years. And at the end of the 3-year period, we'll go out, do an inspection of it, and if it is mostly or all eradicated, seeding will begin at that point. Historically, we've treated once every 3 years and monitor it for two subsequent years. But a lot of it has been, depending on the environment, a lot of it has been regrowing as almost a monoculture of Phragmites again. And so this way we're hoping to knock it out and then reseed aggressively at the end of that treatment cycle.
So one of the things that we're also working on Saratoga Springs, and this might be of interest to others, we've worked with Lake Commission staff a little bit, but our staff is working on an eradication program in our city. We have lots of tributaries coming down into the lake as well, and the phragmites crawls back up those. So that's one thing we're kind of looking at, is how to get those out of our parks, out of our tributaries that lead down to the lake, hopefully to help some of that as well, so it doesn't recede.
One of the biggest difficulties for us up to date has been getting funding and or machinery to smash in a large portion of the lake.
We have
smash is just trample. We use large machinery that look kind of like tanks that are amphibious that get out there and just roll or crush it. And the machines that we have right now, they're called land tamers, and we had high hopes for them, but they aren't able to access a vast majority of the lake. I've got a map in the next couple slides that will show you, but they have not been able to get out there, and they went out of business a few years ago, so finding parts when they break down has been quite difficult. So we're looking at some new machinery this year that would allow us to get out to all of the lake perimeter and be able to crush on a regular basis at much less expensive than currently we have to pay to contract that out. Right now, the best price we've ever had is about $77 an acre, and historically we've paid as much as $500 plus per acre to get that job done. So, and it's a necessary portion of it so that we can smash it down and see the regrowth when it takes place and treat that again. If you have a dead stand of phragmites, the chemical treatment isn't very effective. So.
So I was here a couple of years ago, sun here, and burning is, we were talking about burning.
So burning was one of the options when the project was first started, but upon doing so, they realized that burning actually stimulated the regrowth and it came back with a vengeance. And so, with the exception of right around the canals at the north end of the lake where they can't have biomass floating in the lake while it degrades, so that out of fear that it clogs up those pumps, everywhere else on the lake, burning is not considered as an option.
So right now, you're talking these two areas, but you said that it kind of wraps clear around over into Saratoga. So is it kind of a phased approach where you're hitting these up first and then kind of working your way around the lake, or what's the process there?
So these two areas, Palisade and Provo Bay, they were what we had in our funding request for this year.
Gotcha.
So last summer, last fall, they were chemically treated, and then that grant allowed us to hire for 1,600 acres to be crushed. And so we get an extra 250, so we're at about 1,850 acres that will be crushed. Moving forward, if we can have our own machinery, we'll have chemical and resources to crush about 4,000 acres, and that will be that entire section from Saratoga Springs, the south end by the city marina, all the way up around and down into Provo Bay here.
And this is just the first year that this has happened as far as the chemical treatment and the crushing
No, we're in year 10.
of this particular
So,
section?
no, of the entire lake. So over the last 10 years, with the exception, almost the entire lake shore has been treated at least once. So there's 8,000 acres total. Every year, 1,000 to maybe 1,500 acres has been treated. We've ramped that up a little bit lately, and with this new plan, we'll be able to treat 4,000 acres each year for the next 3 years on the north end of the lake. And we'll try to figure out something to do on the south end for now. Likely a grazing type program to keep it down and maintain it while we really take care of the north end of the lake, and then we'll switch down to that southern end.
Has there been any interest from the Jordan River Commission and from their group working with us trying to get that Jordan River area done too? Because I know that's traveling down the Jordan to Great Salt Lake. Where are we at on working with them? I know they were having problems or
So it's really hard, like we're treating a lot on Great Salt Lake, but working in the Jordan River corridor and getting sized banks is difficult because we can spray, but trying to trample or do on the ground treatments is hard. I think Eric McCulley is working on a proposal, so we're actively working on it, but yeah, it's a little bit different animal, but we're trying to figure out the best way to do it.
Okay. Next item to discuss, we have a grant with the National Park Service's Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Program. It's a planning grant, so we get their hours. Just wanted to mention that is moving along really well. They have a goal of helping us with the master plan. Part of that was developed with the county a number of years ago, but it didn't really kind of get as far as we needed it to start with or continue with implementation. And so they are helping us continue that plan, find funding partners, make final delineations on that trail so that we have a master plan that's ready to be implemented as funding becomes available. So this is their aggressive plan, so we'll be meeting with a number of the staff from various municipalities monthly over the next year to complete that plan. So it's great to have their assistance. They've been doing this all over the state. Brandon Stocksdale is our representative. Came from maybe Orange City at one point, but really good to work with.
Yes, I was just wondering, can we get a copy of that? Email
Yeah,
that?
there's a whole document. I'll send out the document to
Okay.
you so you can read through that.
So, Eric, can I ask a question on that? In
Yeah.
that document, we're getting a lot of development just kind of getting near the lake. Is that trail, as you see it, is that going to be in private property areas, or is it going to be closer to the lake shore where as annexations occur, we need to start preparing for this trail system that will come through?
The preference on the trail is that it acts as the boundary between development and the lake shore. There are a number of locations where currently that isn't an option and will likely be deferring to existing new trail systems that are being added that are partnered with UDOT, where the lake shore connector, Lake Shore Drive, will tie up there. So Provo will be away from the lake a little ways, or for a little while, and then we'll tie back out in Orem. But the preference is that it is as close to the lake shore as possible. So yeah, if it's possible during those annexations or those additional developments, you would have asked, I think that the American Fork has this in their planning documents, that you ask for a trail on the lakeshore side of that development as that is added. So we'll talk a little bit about the Marsh Masters. This map demonstrates where, in red, is where we can currently not work. It's too wet, it's too extreme of an environment for the machinery that we have. It represents the vast majority. 5,000 of those 8,000 acres are not accessible with our current machinery. About 750 are accessible. So those are the drier, slightly more upland areas. And then there's 2,500 some odd acres that are debatable. They're somewhat accessible. But that kind of demonstrates just how important it is, and it's the bulk of where we're actually trying to work right now that just hasn't been accessible for years. So we have gone out and found a number of funding partners to help us purchase two. They're called Marsh Masters. I've got a photo of them in just a second. But here's a cost advantage that we pulled together so that our legislator, Representative Chris Christopherson, could do a budget request from Forestry, Fire, and State Lands restricted account. And we can treat working through our county partners at $11 an acre. So that doing this entire north end of the lake is something in the ballpark of $45,000. And as I mentioned earlier, this year we're doing 1,600 acres, and it's costing us the best deal we've ever had. It's costing us $135,000 for less than half of what we can do for $50,000. So this is super exciting. When we did this math, this is what the Marsh Master will look like. It's equipped with a roller crusher on the back. The track areas float so they can actually get between wet and dry. Right now our land tamers, they do fine in the water, they do fine on dry, but they don't do well in that transitional period, so they end up stuck or breaking axles out in those areas. So we think that we have all of the funding secured for this. The legislative funding we'll find out at the end of the session on Monday. I think they vote on it. But we have partners with the county, with the Department of Ag, Central Utah Water, Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, and DNR's Watershed Restoration Initiative. So it's a $300,000 purchase, and it looks like we'll have that entirely covered and be able to move forward with that July-ish, as long as all those funding sources come through. Okay, that's the end of my report.
Excellent. Anything else on any of the grants? We're good there?
No, we'll do that.
And, okay, we will move on then to.
I apologize.
Please.
Yes. So we have grant requests in this year for $148,000 through our WRI and $148,000 change through the Department of Ag's invasive species mitigation program. And so that's what will allow us to do that full 4,000 acres moving forward. And that'll be for the next 3 years that we make that request.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on then to the Utah Lake Restoration presentation.
So as a quick preface, this is the presentation. Ben Parker came to our last governing board meeting and had a document that he was able to read at the time. They had not gone public with their proposal to forestry, fire, and state lands. They have now submitted that proposal. We've had a chance to meet with a number of the mayors around the lake shore, and we're very supportive of this project. It's pretty exciting. It's very bold, but they'll talk a little bit about it. Feel free to ask questions as we go through.
So my name is Ryan Benson, and I'm the one that's going to be giving the presentation this morning. It was fun to see some of the work presented on phragmites. The work of the Utah Lake Commission on phragmites and carp removal, I think, are demonstrating that these conservation actions produce demonstrable results, and that restoration of Utah Lake is possible. So we appreciate Eric Ellis and the rest of the commission, your consideration on this project. Just a little bit of an update. The last time that Ben came and presented, we were in a preliminary phase of the project, and since that last meeting, we've submitted an application to the state for the project. That proposal, we were trying to keep it short, but there's so much involved, it ended up being 250 pages. So the entire project is available on Lake Restoration Solutions website, and so we encourage you to go there, download that, and dive in. The one thing I will say is 250 pages is hard to get into a 20 to 30 minute presentation. So what we'll do is we'll hit on some topics. We're happy to answer questions, and if there are particular questions on a topic, it's covered to some extent in this, but even 250 pages is not enough to go into the deeper level of the engineering design of this project. So, Ben, will you just come up really quick? So this is Ben Parker. Ben is the one who came up with this master engineering design. So Ben is a Utah County boy, grew up in Springville, and currently lives in Saratoga Springs. Ben, over a decade ago, was working on a large restoration of a wetland in the Midwest. It was a wetland that had been heavily polluted, just like Utah Lake. There was high nutrient values, there was algal bloom problems, and as part of an upgrade of this facility, they were required to restore that wetland around the lake. It was a multi-billion-dollar restoration project, and the end result was a pristine wetland. And that got Ben thinking about this. Ben, do you want to share anything else on that?
No, just that was the impetus for me to start thinking about, there's got to be engineering solutions to help the lake get on a path of restoration to where it can be a lake and do the things that it needs to do naturally and get us past where we're at right now, because without help, the lake will not restore itself. We've got to do certain things, and that's what this project does. It takes takes a master plan approach to the lake, all the issues, and encompasses those and fixes them all together to where the lake can then act as a natural lake should.
All right. So we'll dive into this presentation. I'll try to go fairly quickly. So.
Can you just remind
Yeah.
us, all of this presentation is in the written book?
It's all in the written book.
Okay, and we have to download that ourselves. You're not providing us with
We don't have those today. If you'd like a hard copy, we're happy to provide them. Okay. All right, so just a little history on the lake, and this won't be new information for the members of the Utah Lake Commission. When the pioneers arrived in the valley, Utah Lake was a pristine waterway, and submerged plants dominated the bottom of the lake. There were healthy populations of June sucker, bonnebill, cutthroat trout. And many of you have seen these pictures of these huge trout the pioneers would pull out of that water. Over the last 150 years, the lake has significantly degraded to the point now where it's prone to algal blooms and dominated by invasive species like phragmites and carp. As Ben mentioned, the lake can't recover without an intervention, and this project will bring the funds necessary to do that work. The ecosystem today is essentially broken in almost every important way. The sediments on the bottom of the lake are loaded with nutrients. That goes down 2 to 3 feet deep. The water quality is significantly impaired. Of course, everybody knows about the algal blooms that happen every year. The shorelines are dominated by phragmites. The phragmites, as the Utah Lake mapping shows, surround essentially the entire lake. And in some areas, those stands of phragmites cover acres and acres of shoreline, to the extent that you really can't even access the lake. So let's talk about algal blooms. Last year was a pretty significant algal bloom. It started in Provo Bay in late June, and pretty quickly the advisory spread to the entire lake. That bloom lasted clear until November when they quit doing the studies. And so, you look about the restrictions on activities: do not swim or water ski, do not drink the water, keep pets and livestock away, clean fish well, discard guts, avoid areas of scum when boating. The impact of those algal blooms is very interesting. The boating usage on the lake this last summer, from beginning of July through the rest of the summer, it averaged just 10 to 20 boats on the lake per day. So we have this huge lake, 96,000 acres, one of the largest lakes in the state, that wasn't usable for most of the summer. And considering that 2 million people live within an hour drive of Utah Lake, it's essentially an unutilized recreational resource. Let's go to the next slide. A lot of this started with the carp, of course. The carp are a voracious consumer of submerged plants, and those plants are needed to secure the lake bottom. The carp have consumed essentially all of the plants across the lake to the point now where it's virtually a moonscape. Next slide. We don't need to talk too much about phragmites, other than the fact that it's interesting to see how dominant this species has become so quickly. With up to 20 stems per square foot, it is so dense that even the fish and the wildlife can't get into these areas. This has replaced the native cattails and bulrush that once dominated the area around the lake. This is actually displacing nesting areas for important wildlife species, the waterfowl, the shorebirds, and removing phragmites is one of the important objectives of the Utah Lake Restoration Project. We will be treating every acre around the lake every year, as long as it takes to remove that, and then doing ongoing treatments, spot treatments as needed to make sure that that's controlled for another 20 years. Wind and wave action. If you've been on the lake during a wind event, those waves get pretty big. Of course, it actually gets dangerous and people drown in the lake. One of the things that this project will do is help control the size of the waves. We worked with Aquaveo, which is a leading wave and wind engineering firm in Provo, and they have helped us design the configuration and the placement of islands to help reduce the size of waves during a wind event, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. There's a whole lot, there's a much longer list of things. We won't go into each of them in detail, other than to say that challenges such as poor water flow, low oxygenation, nutrient loading, and this last year we even had 2 E. coli outbreaks on the lake. Ice flows, all of these things are impacting the shoreline, impacting the lake. So this will be a restoration project of the entire lake and its entire shoreline, over 100,000 acres. It's a big, ambitious project. So this, what we are bringing to the table is $6.4 billion in restoration investments. To do all of these things, to dredge the lake is a significant undertaking. This team that has been put together, this is what they've done for their entire career. Big infrastructure projects. They've moved this quantity of material. They've done island creation across the world. Islands that are bigger, more expensive. Projects that are more expensive. The three senior members of this team, Ben Parker, Randy, are you here, Randy? Oh, Randy Finley, and then Bob Scott. They combined have done $150 billion in projects over their career. So $6.4 billion seems like a lot of money, but for them this is a small to moderate sized project, fairly pedestrian, and actually much smaller and less expensive than other projects that they've done around the world.
Can you give us an example of some of the projects they've done around the world?
So one of the projects that Bob was the lead designer on was, help me with the pronunciation, Palmyra. So that was one of the islands off of Saudi Arabia. He's also worked on Dubai Islands. And those are islands that are about the same size as some of the ones that we're putting in the lake. Other infrastructure projects have been in Africa, in Asia, Panama. They did an update on the Panama Canal. And in those projects, they moved a similar quantity of sediment that this project would involve.
So this would be the first one in the United States?
This would be the largest restoration project probably in the history of the United States. Yeah. Next. Actually, let's go back to that slide for just a minute. The core objective of this is to restore the water quality on the lake. The benefits go much deeper than that, but water conservation, water restoration is the core objective. This project will actually increase the holding capacity of Utah Lake. It will reduce evaporation, and combined with all the project benefits will conserve about 34 billion gallons of water a year. Yeah.
So outside the United States, you don't have the same regulations that we have in here. Is that an issue?
Permitting is going to be a significant undertaking, especially the federal EIS and NEPA process. We anticipate that'll take at least 2 to 4 years, and will probably cost several tens of millions of dollars. So federal permitting is not for the weak of heart, right? So that will be an important part of this project.
Do they have relevant experience to pushing through?
So our permitting team is Environmental Planning Group. Cindy Smith, I think I saw Cindy here. Cindy's been doing environmental permitting. She's an expert in NEPA, and she's been doing it for 40 years. That'll be our team that handles that portion of the project. Okay. So dredging. Dredging is you can't restore Utah Lake without dredging the lake. The plan is to increase the depth of the lake on average 5 feet. That won't be a uniform across the lake 5-foot depth. There will be parts of the lake that will be deeper. There may be some parts of the lake that will be shallower. That will all be engineered, designed to improve the underwater topography, improve circulation in the lake, cool the water. Dredging does a few things. The first is those fine sediments on the top. Those are the sediments that get stirred up in even a moderate wind event and turn that to a chalky gray. Those are nutrient-loaded sediments, so they increase the nutrient levels in the lake. Those will be encapsulated. That's the first part. The second part of dredging is to remove the nutrient-loaded sediments deeper into the lake. The goal is to essentially remove all those nutrient-loaded sediments and encapsulate those in the islands. The third part is, of course, deepening the lake. I've talked about that a little bit, and then changing the lakes underwater with bathymetry. There will be some deep water channels. Those channels provide a variety of functions. I won't get into that right now, other than cooling water is important, it also provides important habitats for trout, which we will be restoring on the lake. Next slide. So native species. The native species are struggling on the lake. We have a couple of endangered species. One of those is the June sucker. June sucker rely on a healthy food chain, which is primarily zooplankton. These are the little, almost microscopic organisms that live in these submerged plant beds that used to dominate the lake. As we restore this, we'll be bringing back, and the goal is to not only restore a moderate level of June sucker, but actually to a level where they're taken off the endangered species list. DNR has done a great job with June sucker recovery. They are, there's a feeling that those may be downlisted soon. So that's on a pathway to restoration. This project will help with that. We'll be building a world-class fish hatchery. That will be necessary to do some of the restoration activities. And the objective here is at the end of the restoration, this lake will naturally be able to heal itself. It can't do so right now. An important part of that, and one of the last phases of that, will be the restoration of the native plants. Let's go to the next slide. So currently, when the Sindlers got here, this was a clear water state lake. Right now, it's a hyper-eutrophic lake. The objective will be to restore that to the clear water state. The submerged plants on the bottom will help. Yes?
What is hyper-eutrophic?
Hyper-eutrophic means it has a high nutrient level, and you get these explosions of algae. It's the algal bloom state. But that describes a whole set of criteria that get you to that point. One of the things that will be needed to restore water quality is upgrading wastewater treatment facilities. So the water currently coming out of those wastewater treatment facilities is clean, but it's high in nutrients. And a study done by the state of Utah a few years ago estimated that approximately 214 tons of nutrients are coming from those outflows every year. So we'll be upgrading those, and so the water that comes from the wastewater treatment facilities will be low in nutrients. In addition, we'll be installing 40, yes?
Who's upgrading those?
We're paying for that. So we've allocated $165 million. That's the floor for upgrading those facilities.
So I understand from another council members on the TSSD board, and there are other lakes in Utah that have the same algae bloom that don't have sewer going into them.
That's right.
And so his concern was, well, is it really?
It's not just wastewater treatment facilities. So ambient dust, agricultural runoff, agricultural or the stormwater coming off, all of those things contribute to that. And so just upgrading the wastewater treatment facilities won't be enough. It's necessary though. It's an important component of this. Yeah.
So with those upgrades, what kind of maintenance differences are there cost-wise to us as members of those facilities in comparison with what we're doing now? Because obviously you're going to upgrade this, but maintenance will be left to us as users.
That's right. So the biggest cost is the upgrade. In our analysis, if users were to bear the upgrade costs, it would be almost a 100% increase in user fees per user. The maintenance cost should be about 40 to 50 cents a user per month, and so there is a cost there, but most of the heavy burden is actually on the upgrade fees. Yeah.
Maybe I'm getting ahead of you a little bit, but as we're hearing this, has there been any discussion amongst those other agencies like TSSD, Provo, Orem, and those sewer treatment facilities, and their governing boards, so that we kind of see what's coming?
So we've presented to the wastewater treatment facilities. There will be additional conversations. While we go through that permitting phase, we'll get into, of course, much deeper conversations. Some of the facilities have infrastructure updates they need to do anyway. So there will be further conversations, but yes, we've started that conversation.
Have they generally been agreeable to have you pay for the upgrades? I know that sounds like a funny question. I imagine that with an upgrade in a facility, there is potentially new training for employees. There's maybe different things that have to happen from their perspective, and so there may be costs that maybe they're not willing to incur. And what has been their reaction to this offer?
So one of the things to be aware of, and we could spend a lot of time on this topic, there's been a lot of pressure on them to just do the upgrades, right? And so, and to your point, maybe the feeling that, hey, this is all your problem, when it really isn't all their problem, right? There's a lot of other things going on. So there's been some sensitivity. I would say the first conversation went very well. We need to have further conversations. I think they're open to the idea of having a group come in, pay for those. Of course, that relieves a lot of that cost burden. There's still a lot of work to do. I wouldn't characterize it as we're done. That's for sure. To the point of other challenges on the lake, there's a couple things going on. The water column is already nutrient loaded, right? Even if you upgraded the facilities, if you don't dredge, the nutrients on the bottom of the lake will continue to load that for 100 years. And so this is just one tool in the tool chest. Another important tool are biofiltration systems around the lake. These will look like rivers, waterfalls. They'll be natural in their appearance, but we'll be cycling water out of the lake through those treatment facilities. They will treat up to 250,000 gallons of water per unit. Per day, yeah. So those 40 treatment facilities will improve water quality. They also create wildlife habitat. The waters coming out of that are great for fish and for other wildlife.
Who will be maintaining those
We will be
in perpetuity?
in perpetuity. The goal is to get the lake to the point where it's healing itself. And so at some point in the project, and that could be 20 years down the road, those will become less and less important. The other thing that we'll be adding is aeration systems around the lake, as well as some pumping facilities. Currently, the circulation model is based largely on wind and wave action. As we control some of that, we need to add some additional pumping to make sure the lake is circulating correctly. Let's go to the next slide. Studies. Okay, so the engineering, the design, the monitoring, the scientific studies, we need to make sure that the project does what it's designed to do and that we're able to demonstrate those results. We have $500 million allocated to this phase of this. We'll be working with wildlife biologists, with local universities. These will be big studies. We'll know more about the lake at the end of this project than we did before. But more importantly, we'll be monitoring, ensuring that each of these tools are producing the desired outcomes. Next slide. Okay, so what do you do with the dredge material? Deepening the lake by an average of 5 feet, 96,000 acre lake, it's almost 1 billion cubic yards of material. It's hard to fathom how much that is. There's been different proposals. I mean, we've been talking about dredging for a long time. One proposal was to fill in Goshen Bay. Other ideas have emerged over the years. One of the challenges of Goshen Bay is that it's important nesting habitat for shorebirds that use this Great Basin flyaway. So the islands store the dredge material. They encapsulate those materials so they're not leaking back into the lake. They also help control wind and wave action, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. They expand wildlife habitat and help in a number of other conservation roles. Next slide. So this is how we create these islands. The first thing is we use a GO2, which is an Army Corps of Engineer design. They provide an outline We actually pump those fine sediments, those small micron sediments into these tubes. That encapsulates them, holds them in place, but it also provides a solid foundation for an outline of an island. Next slide.
What is that tube made out of?
It's made out of a, well, you want to answer that question?
HDPE. It's a permeable HDPE fabric.
High density polyethylene.
Doesn't degrade over time?
High strength, yeah, doesn't degrade over time.
Even exposed, its estimated shelf life is 100 years, but when you cover that, which we plan to do, it stays there indefinitely.
So 100 years, it does degrade.
That's
If it's
the sunlight.
exposed,
That's when
and it
it's
won't be
to
exposed.
sunlight.
So completely covered, it doesn't ever degrade.
Degrade.
What's your longest lasting island thus far that you've created?
What's the,
I mean, you've done this in other areas, right? So
So-
how old is your oldest project?
well, that's Bob's project, those are in Dubai.
Okay.
Those didn't have this technology. They did, theirs completely out of sand. Obviously, we've got silts, clays, gravels, calcite stones that we'll be building ours with. But this is just the outline. It's what holds the island together
Initially. Yeah.
So does the Army Corps of Engineers use that to create barrier reefs or?
Yeah, other dredging, they create airports, they create roadways.
This system is very typical what they're doing on shorelines on our coasts. And they go in and they put in these geotubes coming out to protect beaches. So it diverts flow around those beaches so they don't erode.
So they have a long history of
Yes.
data sources.
Yeah.
And even without, this is important for the first couple of years, but once the islands are created, those islands are their own structure. They're not reliant wholly on these tubes. Once those tubes are in place, then you start dredging. So we talked about the volume of material. To put this in context, this is 60 dredgers working 20 hours a day, 6 days a week for 8 years to move that quantity of material. That dredge material is then put into this outline shape of the geotubes and to infill that body with engineered fill. The other thing is the volume of material that's moved and how you move that. If you do it too quickly, you actually drop the lake level. And so this will be timed so that that lake level remains consistent as you do this. Once the material is there, of course it's saturated with water. So this is a technology that's been used all over the world. It's called, remind me the name of this. PVD drains. They're placed essentially every meter. These are put down 30 to 40 feet. The water comes out of those once an overburden is placed on top. By the time you're done, that's solid land. Okay. The other thing that's happening, I probably should have said this on the last slide. It's not just mud that's pumped into these. Different parts of the lake have silts, sands, sediments, gravel. You're actually pumping from those different parts of the lake and mixing to provide a soil structure that will be engineered to provide a solid base for future development. Next slide. Once the water, this is dewatered, then we go through and do a dynamic compaction and actually compact that soil. By the time we're done, the geotechnical engineering shows us that we can reach about 98% compaction. That's probably more solid than the ground that this building is built on. We're not just leaving that to chance. We go through a quality control testing. There's systems that are in place that we go and we analyze how compact that soil is before any development occurs. The final step is to provide rock around the outside of these islands, gravels, riprap. When you're done, it'll look like a natural island, and it'll be planted and be a place where people want to spend time. This is an overview of islands across the lake. The design was configured to reduce surface area on the lake by about between 16 and 20%. The reason we did that was to reduce evaporation. We're actually on the lower end of that. We're closer to 16%. So it's about that main island in the middle is just under 10,000 acres. Altogether, it's approximately 16,000 acres of new land. Next slide. Okay, so this slide shows one of the most important benefits, and that is the role that these islands play in reducing wave action. So, wave size is a product of fetch length, and fetch length is essentially how far that wave rolls across the lake. Currently, in a 26-mile-an-hour wind event, that produces a 1 to 3 foot wave across, let's see if I have it up there, across 85% of the lake. With the island design, that changes to a 6-inch to a 1 foot wave across 65% of the lake, or it's across 85% of the lake. And the green areas are a 1 foot wave or smaller. The blue areas are a 6-inch wave or smaller. What this does is it creates safe zones around the island. So if somebody's out recreating on the lake, the wind kicks up, you simply pull into an island, go on shore, have a picnic until the wave dies down, then you can go out and recreate once again. But this also plays an important conservation purpose. As we're restoring those submerged plants, the wind action currently, or the wave action can currently disturb those and uproot those plants. This provides an opportunity for restoration of submerged water zones, and once again, that's an important part of this. Yeah.
So you said in pioneer times we had a very clear lake full of plant life on the bottom. We didn't have these islands,
We didn't have the islands. We
So-
had submerged plants.
but they survived just fine without the islands. So I guess I'm just wondering why.
So the carp ate the plants.
Well, I get that, but you're saying they will never restore themselves without these islands? I'm just curious as to what the...
So it's a multi-factored problem now, right? It's a combination of wind, of carp, of other things. If all the carp were removed, those submerged plants may eventually come back. It's a long process, and it's because of that orbital velocity on the bottom of the lake.
Yeah, the carp is the deciding factor there. Before, there were no carp, so over time, the lake filled in with the plants. But now, again, we don't know how long it took for that plant bottom to actually...
So eventually it would happen even without the islands?
Eventually, but it
Maybe
may
in
be
100
200
years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, Ryan.
Yes.
You still have to dredge it. I'm Ben's brother, and I've been doing this with him for over the 12 years we've been doing it, but we still have to dredge it. So the question is, what do you do with that material unless you want hundreds of years to pass, you know, with algal blooms and a cesspool out in the lake? So the question is, what do you do with that? So the islands solve all of those issues to your question, right? It's just, okay, what do you do with the material? So.
Okay, next. 190 miles of new shoreline actually creates significant new wildlife habitat. This will benefit the birds. Not only were we restoring the 76 miles of shoreline, we're actually creating 190 miles of new shoreline. What this means is more swans, more geese, more shorebirds, and better habitat. So this benefits everything on the ecosystem. We'll be replanting that native vegetation. Some of these emergent plants, like bulrush, cattails, they actually remove the phosphorus, the nitrates from the lake, and so those will actually be, it'll be a compounding benefit as opposed to a compounding detriment. Next slide. Talked about this a little bit. Reducing the surface area on the lake and deepening the lake, that provides a significant evaporation benefit. It's the biggest change is the reduced surface area, but increasing the depth, cooling the lake, it conserves approximately 22 to 26 billion gallons of water annually. Phragmites also is a very thirsty plant. Removing that saves almost 9 billion gallons annually. The end result, this is a state that needs water. We know that there are a lot of sensitivity. This year is going to be a tough year. This project will have more available water. It will improve the quality of that water. And, you know, Utah Lake is an important storage facility for the Central Utah Water Project. It plays such an important role in water usage across the Wasatch Front. One other benefit, the Central Utah Water Project was designed to bring more water to the Wasatch Front. A lot of that water is not being brought now because the June sucker is currently listed. Delisting that species means that we can bring more water to the Wasatch Front. So from a water storage, a water conservation, a water availability standpoint, this is an important development. Yeah.
So the net volume of the lake isn't going to change.
They'll actually increase.
And
Yeah.
if you're reducing evaporation, is it going to continue to rise?
If the current outflows were the same, it would continue to rise. It'll actually produce increased outflows. So for the Jordan River, for Salt Lake City, for all the downstream water users, this is a good thing.
The Salt Lake will not shrink.
The Great Salt Lake, is that?
Should benefit from this as well.
Should benefit.
Yeah.
Right now, I don't know if you've been out there lately, but Farmington Bay is dry. So, yeah, it will definitely help.
There was a question.
I was just wondering, we can discuss in here a lot about the water rights that everyone has and how much goes to Salt Lake, how much goes here, etc. Every inch of the lake currently has someone holding it.
Yeah.
So this additional water that we would be saving, who would have those water rights? You?
So we currently don't. They wouldn't be ours, right? Water rights are water rights. Is there a more sensitive topic? Probably not, right? We don't have any control over that. This is a benefit we produce. It's not a benefit we receive. Just like any development, we'll need to secure water rights. Probably most of that will come from the Central Utah Water Project. There's an estimated 2 million new residents coming to the Wasatch Front in the next 40 years. The nice thing about this project is we're helping to solve that problem, not just creating a problem. The development's coming one way or another, and this is a project that helps to solve that.
It mitigates the current problem. My understanding is we've oversold the water rights that we have. So we have water rights that we've sold for water that doesn't exist.
Yeah, we're fighting over a diminishing resource, right? This helps to address that and should alleviate a lot of that burden. I think water conservation is an important thing. It's important to note we are not recommending any reduction in water rights. That's really not our role. But there's been some questions like, hey, as you're conserving water as part of the plan to try to, eliminate water rights. No, we're helping to solve that problem. Next slide. There's 3 types of islands that are created. The estuary islands that are around the outside of the lake, those will help address ice flows. They protect shorelines. They allow restoration of riparian habitats, upland habitats around the lake. They provide safe areas for paddleboarding and other types of recreation. Recreation islands are dotted across the lake. This is, to me, one of the most exciting things. These recreation islands will have beaches, docks, campgrounds. This will bring, as people want to come spend time on the lake, this is going to be a great place to spend time. Our hope is that people not only spend the day, but want to spend, the weekend or even the week. Come out, stay in a cabin, stay in a campsite, spend the day recreating on the lake. And then finally, the development islands. How do you pay for $6.4 billion in restoration? That's been the thing that's been holding up restoration of Utah Lake. This dredging project, as we talked about, is very intensive and requires a lot of money. The development islands are the solution to pay for restoration. It's, let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So for recreation, we want to bring people back to the lake. An important note here is Utah Lake last summer averaged 8,500 visitors a month, but very little of that was boating, right? a much, much smaller lake, Jordanelle, averaged 65,000 visitors a month. Jordanelle has infrastructure, they have campsites, they have clean water. Bringing this back to the lake will restore that as well. We did an analysis. People asked, hey, how do these, some of these islands, how much lake are we losing, right? Is there going to be enough left? So we looked at every lake in this state that was from 20,000 acres to 40 acres. The biggest of those being Strawberry. And 22 lakes? All of those would fit on the surface of Utah Lake, and there would be a remaining 22,000 acres. So the recreation opportunity on the lake is huge, and we want to put in infrastructure to support that. Next slide. We want to improve the lake. We talked about a little bit about beaches. There will be 12 new beaches, or 12 miles of new beaches, and that actually equates to 12 beaches. Half of those will be sand beaches, half of them will be gravel. The sand will be resort rated. It'll be 8 feet deep. It'll be underlayered with a geofabric that will prevent the mud from coming up. This is going to be a special opportunity. Next slide. And free to the public. Bringing back the native trout to the lake. Who doesn't like to go fishing, right? And currently, it's all invasive species. And I think 0.3% of the fish on the lake is the June sucker. It's the only native fish left. Next slide. Recreation islands, campgrounds, picnic areas. Those recreation islands will be a lot of fun. Bring people back to the lake. Next slide.
Will not be its own entity manages itself and has fees that cover its operating costs.
So we will initially manage those. We've had some discussions whether we make those state parks. Whatever the state wants to do on those, they will be open and free to the public. Just like any campground, there will be a nominal fee for an overnight stay. The trail system. So it was fun to see that you've got a grant to do a trail system. We want to help pay for that. We'd like to do an entire trail system around the lake. That trail system will extend to the causeways and then onto the islands of the lake. And just a great opportunity to do a high-grade recreation opportunity around the lake. Anything else you want to say about the trail system, Ben?
No, just that it's an important part of bringing people back to the lake. The idea of the trail is to make all shoreline accessible so people can get down there and recreate. Right now, with our fragmiting problem, we just can't do that.
And one of the things we need to do is sit down with some of the shoreline cities and talk about placements of beaches so your residents have access to those and to that trail system. The other part of that, of course, is removing the phragmites. Even if you can get to the shore right now, you can't get to the lake because you've got 20 acres of phragmites in front of you. Next. Let me add just one thing. There will be some portions of that trail system will be raised, a raised boardwalk because of sensitive areas, wetlands, and that sort of thing. So it will be a responsible trail system, I guess we could say. We talked a little bit about the development islands. One of the things, as we were in some early phases of this, we had an environmental group approach us and say, we're worried about open space. And they actually came with the recommendation that we increase open space and increase some areas of the density of development to provide more open space. Of all the island area that is being created, 64% of that is open space. Those are parks, they're trails, they're roads, so it's open to the public. Once again, this is going to be a great place to spend time. Next slide. This will be the first LEED certified city in the U.S. There are significant infrastructure investments going into capturing stormwater, to doing treatment, to making sure that this island doesn't have a negative impact on the lake. As we're restoring the lake, the last thing we want to do is have the development create new problems. Next slide. Talked a little bit about the team. One of the things that I love about this team, these are guys that have done some of the most impressive infrastructure projects around the world. But these are also Utahns. These are people that went to BYU, that went to Utah State, that grew up in Utah. They are now bringing those skills that they've gained in infrastructure projects around the world back to Utah and coming together to produce what is going to be a gem of a lake, a gem of a community on the lake, and there's some exciting things happening. So without much further comment, I'd like to invite Roger Brooks to come up and talk just about some of the economic opportunities and tourism opportunities that come as a result of this project, and then we'll open it up to questions.
I'm Roger Brooks. I'm one of the few non-Utah residents here. I actually am from the Northwest and live down in the Phoenix area. We have been a contractor for the Utah Office of Tourism over the last 4 years. We have worked in 17 counties in Utah. I'll be in St. George next week. So our background is we really came from tourism, and the other work that we do is downtown development. We've worked in 1,500 communities around the world in 45 states. Just to give you a rough background, and one thing that's really important is I speak at about 100 events a year. I came directly here from Bismarck, North Dakota, where it was -2. I arrived in Salt Lake City yesterday, it was 60. Talk about surprise. When I talk to municipal leagues, I keynoted at the American Planning Association conference, the Utah chapter in Park City, a couple of months ago, and so we really get into community development. A couple things I wanted to mention is for the first time in U.S. history, quality of life is leading economic development. Up to this point, every town, there's 19,500 cities and towns in the United States. And they're all built on, whether it's agriculture, mining, whether it's transportation, waterways. And as we start to remake our geography, cities everywhere are looking for their second act. And so for the very first time, quality of life is leading economic development. Water is number one to quality of life for tourism, for community development. And another thing that's really happening, the Wall Street Journal reported on this, Urban Land Institute, is that for the very first time, jobs are going to where the talent is or where the talent wants to be. And that's a huge switch from the way it used to work. And then, of course, water, once again, and recreation is drawing these workers in. So a lot of times I'll tell people that tourism is the front door to your non-tourism economic development. The other thing that I wanted to mention real quick is that tourism in Utah in 2016 was $8.4 billion. And the state has spent tens of millions of dollars every year promoting the Mighty Five as a big draw into Utah. But they're also going up to Flaming Gorge. They're obviously in the ski areas along the Wasatch Front. And so, but the one thing in this whole valley is, as a tourism draw, you don't really have a recreational lake. Like Jordanelle, the reservoir up there, look at, 10 times the number of visitors. And then the other thing is that the millennial generation outnumbers the boomers. Biggest generation in U.S. history. As a matter of fact, 70%, when I was 16, that day I was down getting my driver's license. 70% of the millennial generation has no desire to drive. They want transit-oriented development. They want pedestrian-friendly places. 90% of our work is in downtowns, creating a sense of place. What's really cool about this development is that it is really built around residential, pedestrian-friendly. It's really a city of tomorrow. Having an elite certified city, and this really creates an amazing opportunity. It creates a great sense of place. 90% of the developed area here is residential. And so, I just think having that 60% of public space makes it a desirable place for people to live. And, when I was in North Dakota just this last week, the governor and I were talking, and he said, Roger, our problem is we have 2% unemployment in North Dakota. And we have 20,000 jobs we're trying to fill. What do we have to do to improve the quality of life? In your case, you have the quality of life. I've often said Utah has more diverse landscapes than any place in North America. From the Bonneville Salt Flats, to the Grand Staircase, to the Red Rock, I mean, you name it. Utah Lake should be part of that. I mean, it's one of the bigger lakes in the entire western United States, so it really creates a tremendous economic potential. And for this development, you know, some people may think, well, this development is here. They're going to clean up the lake so they can make a lot of money on these islands. That's really not the way this is working, because if you don't provide an outstanding lake, then the development's not going to come. And so that's why the lake restoration is more important than the development on the lake. The development on the lake is just a way to fund it. Because the cost of restoring this lake would be 60% of the state's annual budget. Every single person, every single agency in the state. It just publicly keep doing the stopgap measures. Sometimes you guys say, how do we fix the problem? And this is a way to do it and do it responsibly and really create a city of tomorrow.
Roger, can I just
With
add
that,
something
yeah.
there? We looked at just the dredging part of this project, which is less than half of the total cost. If the dredging part of this were borne by the residents of Utah County, it would be $180 a household a year or a month for 20 years, just the dredging. The full project, it's just cost prohibitive to bear this by the public.
And the tourism spending in Utah turns out to be about $2,700 per resident in Utah. That's how much people outside the state are spending in Utah. $2,700. That is a lot of tax base being offset. And granted, the Salt Lake Valley already gets a lot of tourism because of Salt Lake City, because of BYU, Provo, this area. But when it comes to recreation, we're sending them somewhere else. We're sending them over the hill into Heber Valley or Flaming Gorge or down south along Highway 89. And I think it's about time that you create an amazing asset in the valley. And this is a great way to leverage it. So with that, that's all my comments.
I just want to show one last thing. We're going to pull up a different. Another PowerPoint. This is the video. Go to the video. So surface area comparison. Let's just show this. So this is Strawberry Reservoir and how that looks compared to the overall size of Utah Lake, acre per acre. Next, that's Yuba Lake, which is the second largest lake. That's Willard Bay. That's how Willard Bay would look on Utah Lake. Keep going. Deer Creek, Jordanelle, Fish Lake, Echo, Gunnison Reservoir, Penguich Reservoir, Delta, Joes Valley. So literally there's hundreds upon hundreds of boating days on those other reservoirs. On the restored Utah Lake, the opportunity for water-based recreation is just incomparable with any other part of the state. And so with that, questions? Yeah.
Well, we've had the privilege to sit down with you guys. So I've had some time to digest this a little bit. I don't know if everybody else has. So, but I will just say this. I have come to the conclusion it's going to take big ideas to fix this. And so I'm real supportive of this. I think we need to head down this path of big ideas to fix it. But along the way, as a city, and we are trying to master plan transportation issues, especially as we try to move people out west from American Fork. We stand kind of in the middle as a hub. And so I would just maybe ask, what are some of the next steps as you see them? Because I think it's important for us as cities, as we see this, that we start master planning a little bit around this, because we might have to increase road width leading down to our harbor. And if we don't see them coming and plan on those, then we're going to be caught off guard with some of the expenses and stuff to help, again, bring the people into the lake. Currently, we're the closest harbor from Salt Lake County. And off of the I-15 corridor. So next steps so that we can kind of see where you're heading, where you think it might end up, and then we can start planning accordingly. The vineyard collector, we've talked about that extensively.
Go back to that last slide.
It's a huge undertaking, and if this is going to help move traffic east and west into the Saratoga Springs area, how do we talk with UDOT and other transportation committees that might be able to look at this as well? Because they're out talking 10, 12 years for a vineyard collector.
Yeah.
And we're securing property for it right now. So I just feel like we can work together in all this, and I really like the big ideas that you're proposing.
So thanks for that feedback. And transportation is a huge topic, right? There's actually 3 causeways that will be formed by this. The top end of that island, that first causeway there, that comes about Center Street in Provo. It's a lot further south than I think, that I initially realized anyway.
So is it by the state park then?
By the state park.
Stop, just stop.
And so that should alleviate some of that west side traffic and bring it across, but which would also alleviate some of that north end traffic. The topic of transportation is a big one. Getting with UDOT, getting with the cities, and figuring out how this all works together. That's another project, or another part of this project we'll be working on during the permitting phase.
Hey, Brian, when a question's asked, could you just repeat it to the back?
Oh yeah, the question was just on the transportation and
Thanks.
how we make sure the cities and yeah.
2 questions. So one, how are the causeways so that the boat traffic can continue on the lake? And then second, timeline for this project? It seems like might be decades.
That's a great question. So both good questions. There are 2 bridges, or there's a bridge on each part of that causeway. Those bridges will be at 90 feet high. Okay, so even a big sailboat can go underneath. Interestingly, we initially planned for bigger bridges, but the circulation model instructed a narrower bridge to increase the flow, the rate of flow. So all of that's designed with lake circulation in mind. In terms of time frame, dredging is 8 years. Okay, so, and we have at least 2 years of permitting. To get to the point where we have all of the islands in place is about a decade. There's probably another 25 years of development after that. So this is an iterative process that will happen over time, which is actually good from a planning standpoint.
So you're saying this is after the environmental impact?
Another 8 years after the environmental
So
impact and the permitting is
environmental
done.
impact will take how many years?
At least 2, but it could
Maybe
be
more,
4,
and
maybe
then-
even a little more than that.
Yes, and I've been involved with those, so I
Yeah.
understand that process.
We don't define that, right?
Yes, exactly. And then 8 years of dredging,
Mhm.
and at that point, then how many years before our average, if we're going to promote tourism, whether there's development on the lake or not, they would still be able to access those islands or other recreational
The-
opportunities. So
Yeah.
what, if we're just guessing, then where is the time frame from today to recreational opportunities?
So the conservation is front-loaded, right? So that the benefits start appearing even at the early phases of those projects. But in terms of all of the recreation, all of that being done, it will be in the first 10 years.
Okay.
The lake will continue to improve over time. So, but yeah, if you're thinking this is going to happen 5 years from now,
No,
that's not the case.
I was thinking actually longer.
Longer.
Than 10 years, so
Best case 2030.
2030.
Best case, 2030 probably, yeah. There was a question over here.
Just 2 questions. So you said Center Street for that first causeway. I'm curious where it connects on the west side.
Too far south right now.
Oh, so there's going to be an interchange down here at Provo East Bay that comes up and feeds over, and then we need to get with UDOT. The Mountain View corridors flip back and forth between each side of this mountain.
It's on the
Currently,
west
it's on this side.
It's on the west side.
Oh, is it on the west side
It's on
now?
the east side now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it would connect to that Mountain View corridor, which then would enable them to go up.
So right now, Mountain View Corridor comes in and comes down to Pelican, it doesn't go down to Florida.
Yeah.
So there's actually a map on page 173. There's a section there on transportation, but yeah.
The other question was, during the 8 years of dredging, what, for those of us who live around the lake, what are we experiencing? Are we just seeing some distant crane out in the middle of the water that's doing stuff? Is the water level going down? What's happening?
The dredgers look like a boat, right? And they have some piping, so you'll see these dotted across. You'll be able to continue to recreate. The design of the dredging will maintain the lake level. By the time we're done, by the time these 8 years are done, lake level will actually stay more consistent throughout the year. So that's a good thing. But yeah, there may be some sections of the lake during certain phases that won't be available, but for the most part, the lake will be usable and accessible as long as you don't run into a boat or a dredger.
With the biofilters and the water plants, were those phased in before the dredging, so we started to see algae bloom?
Exactly. That's an early phase of the project.
Well, it is early, but it's throughout. Those happen throughout that 8 years. So some of it, yes, but the long term, after those 8 years, that's when you see the big improvements. And we could dredge this lake faster. That's not the issue. The issue is we have to, with our evaporation savings that we save, we have to dredge according to that, so we're not lowering the level, but keeping it the same.
Yeah.
So at what point through this process would I have access in my community looking at secondary and tertiary effects for environmental quality? For example, Spanish Fork, we have Benjamin, Palmyra Lakeshore, a lot of farmers. I'm sure with the cleaning of the lake that a lot of those farmers, I would guess there would be new environmental impacts on what they can and can't do because we're cleaning the lake, and so now anything that accesses or touches it, Spanish Fork River, for example, and other tributaries, I would foresee restrictions or additional costs and things above the $165 million in wastewater treatment facilities. Where and when through this process would communities have access to that information so that the farmers know what may or may be coming to them as far as environmental quality impacts, tributaries that access the river, what we would have to worry about and cost upstream going to it, when and how?
So let me just add this to that conversation. Our objective here is not to increase unnecessarily administrative costs on existing users. We have funding in place to put in, I want to say biofilters, but
They're bioswells.
bioswells. We'll actually pay for those for some of these agricultural places. So those outflows become cleaner. We're not expecting those private landowners to bear that cost. So we're going to carry some of that. That will be part of the EIS process, and of course sovereign lands. It's going to be a lot of work. But again, the objective is not to create unnecessary burden. It's to bring everybody together and say, where are we getting inflows that are high in nutrient values? What can we do to help remediate that? A healthy lake actually can control some of those nutrient levels. The problem is we don't have those submerged plants. Those submerged plants and help control that things. Even snails and mollusks are a part of that. As we restore those things, the lake will become resilient again. Right now it's not. Was there another question? Yeah.
This might be a sensitive question, and I apologize for asking it if it is, but sometimes we see big projects or big ideas that come to fruition, and then somewhere along the line, funding mechanisms drop, and all of a sudden it stays in some kind of a state that is in limbo. Mm-hmm. Is it fair to ask maybe just a financial structure? Where do you see this $6.5 billion coming from? And how solid is that? If this progresses and it gets going, that we have assurance that it will see it to fruition?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So the financial model is really important. Just to put this in context, if the state were to contract this out, we're doing this on a self-performed basis, so we don't make money on the conservation. If the state were to contract this out, it would be over $12 billion. That would immediately turn upside down and the project wouldn't work. So part of the innovation here is using that land, but doing it in phases, okay? So, for example, phase 1 is restoration of Provo Bay, okay? We do all of that conservation before land would be granted to help pay for that. There's a way to do that successfully. There's also a way that it can get screwed up very quickly. The other component of that is design. The financial model needs to be able to accommodate for changes in the market, right? We anticipate 1, possibly 2 recessions during the part of this project. It's all designed to be able to sustain that. In terms of financial models, we'd love to sit down with you and show you in more detail. That's a longer conversation with our financial team. But to the point, as we've talked about this, maintaining that flexibility and ensuring the project remains healthy. The other thing is that this is happening in phases, so conservation benefit happens before the land is transferred. Is there another question? Yeah.
So do you envision jobs being located on the islands so that people, there would be less of a propensity for people to have to commute off the island?
So this won't just be a residential development. There will be a business sector. Most of the land is in residential, but there, the goal is to help this be an attractor to business for the state. Of course, all of Utah County is exploding, right? People want to come here. It has a great workforce, and so there would be some of that. Yes.
So, Ryan, we're in the age now, you've probably heard the term transit-oriented developments where people live, work, you have retail and living up. And so this really has a lot of mixed use of single family, multifamily, some larger scale, some smaller scale, very pedestrian oriented. And so it's really meant to, so that you don't end up with huge commutes. I mean, you know what 15 is like during the commute period. This is really meant to be a place where people can live and work and not even have to own a car, except to go off island and visit the other areas around. This will also slow the leakage of your locally earned money that is now being spent in those other lakes that you saw in Heber Valley and other areas of the state. So that's multiple good effects.
Yeah.
Another question then with regards to the economic impact of the project itself. How many, you'll put those out to bid, etc. How many companies within our state boundaries have the capacity to do this project, or will it all be from outside coming in?
So it'll be a combination, but it'll also be a lot of self-performed, right? If we contract it all out, you could escalate the cost too quickly. The objective here is to help everyone. The water, the increased water in the bay, all the ships rise. This project is anticipated to bring 22,000 new jobs, and that's a great opportunity. The question is, with our low unemployment, how much of that can be serviced locally? We want to work with local developers, people within the state. This is really intended to be a project that benefits everyone in the state.
Frank, if you don't mind, if board is okay with it, I'd like to open up if we have any public questions really quickly, just maybe 5 minutes, and then after that we'll move on to the rest of our agenda. Any problems with that?
Just a question on the transportation piece. On page 237, you have the roadways. When Ben came and visited with Sprinkle City, he had a huge map you could blow up and you could actually see the streets. I think that if you had a more public accessible piece of that,
we can put that on your website.
Blow this up only so big. But it's, as I was telling Mark earlier, it's a great conversation piece. Again, it's 30, 40 years out. But if you wanted to give us some tools that would help us understand it better, I think having it on the web and that whole book right here, as well as all these photos, but I would like to see maybe a little bit more on the infrastructure, particularly the highways.
Absolutely. And as we work with UDOT, they may recommend some changes, right? As we work with the cities, this is a preliminary design that's well thought through, but there's parts of this project that will continue to evolve as we know more.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. Please, can you state your name and where
Dave
you're from?
Roberts, and I'm actually from Saratoga Springs. I was wondering if there's been any studies on the current lakes right now. Like last summer we went up to Tibble Fork, and it was just totally crowded. I guess what I'm saying is, have been any studies on what all the lakes, Deer Creek, everywhere would look like in 25 years with all the new population if this didn't happen?
I don't know the answer to that, but this is a challenge in the state. We have such great recreation. Those areas are getting, even our national parks are getting overcrowded. And providing more recreational opportunities actually help alleviate that as the population expands, as people come to the state. And so that's a significant benefit.
Please, in the very back and then forward.
My name is Ben Beckus, I live in Springville, and so I have a couple of concerns, and I know some of the people here. But with that being said, I moved to this state in '95, so 23 years ago, and the easiest way to put it is professionally I'm very involved, and it is a wrecking ball in my recreational life quite often, so I want to be able to play. So one of the concerns I have is in the 23 years I've been here, I have seen us everything from having the luge going over the point of the mountain to our traffic being terrible. One of the questions, that is really important to me is when I have time down, I want to be able to use this lake. And so my big concern is looking at this, I'm a huge supporter, by the way, is how soon can we open up the viaduct, or however you want to call it, the causeway across the lake, so that we can get better use, but also with this opening the lake, because I raised my babies on this lake. My kids grew up on this lake. I spent almost their entire lives on this lake on a recreational basis. And now I have grandbabies, and my kids are now concerned about their health and things like that. And so the concern is just in the last couple of years, trying to get on the lake sometimes has been a nightmare. Are we going to have greater access through other areas?
So that's a great question. Can I just respond to that?
Sure.
So there will be additional facilities built around the lake to enable people to get on the lake. We're talking marinas, right?
Right. Well, the other thing is, I've spent thousands and thousands of hours on this lake. I can tell you 24/7, based on where the wind is blowing, where you can find glassy water. So I'm an old water skier. I love this lake. And through the years of my kids that have grown up, we've gone through that. The lake is green crap. I personally don't care. But the thing is I'm a little excited because looking at these islands, it will open up more usable water to people who actually want to use the lake for recreation, not just the beaches. It will cut down on the wakes. It will cut down on the swells. It will create greater boating safety. Because right now, last time I went out, it was a maze. It was nuts. It wasn't safe to put a kid on a wakeboard. That's how bad the swell were and the waves. So, those are my three primary concerns. One is how do we control traffic? Because as we make this lake more and more popular, we're going to need more ramps and marinas. Mm-hmm. And then, obviously, water quality is really important because I got kids that are not very concerned about that. And the other thing is basically developing the infrastructure.
Yeah. So there will actually be 11 new marinas on the lake.
Beautiful.
And in terms of transportation, to put all of these islands in place will, like I said, will take 8 years. But those causeways will be done before that, right? There will actually be development happening throughout that project, and so it happens in phases. And when you see the map of what this looks like, that's what it's going to look like, in 2060 maybe, right? But the opportunity to get on the lake, the opportunity to get across the lake, all of these things are contemplated, and that's, for me, when I got involved, one of the things that impressed me most about this project was not just the conservation, but the idea that this should be for the people of Utah. This is an opportunity to bring your families on the lake. Whether you live there or don't, it'll be great to go and hang out in the park, to get on a waterway, a paddleboard, to look at the wildlife, to go fishing. The end result is designed for the people of the state of Utah.
You're right, we're going to take one more question. Don't we?
Yeah, so it's not clear to me how this dovetails with, my name is Bill Bowman from Lehigh. It's not clear to me how this project will dovetail with ongoing efforts like phragmites. that's been going on for 10 years with the curb removal for the last 7 or 8 years. And then other projects like the Provo River Delta Restoration Project. You know, how is that gonna?
So those will all continue. If anything, we'll augment them, right? So the goal here is not to stop the good work that's happening. It's to increase the funding to do it the right way. And so, you know, we've had extensive conversations with state agencies that are involved with all of those. And we're here, and it needs to be a collaboration. This isn't one project to dominate this all. This is to provide additional resources and funding to accelerate the work of restoration.
Yeah, can I just ask one more question, and this may be a more detailed question, but from a financial standpoint, I mean, we talk about an 8 to 12 year time frame from a dredging perspective before the islands are made. So from a, you know, your ability to monetize anything on this, you're talking a 10 to 12 year, you know, timeline with billions of dollars invested. You know, what happens if, you know, when we have a development happen in our city, you know, we have to request them to bond for the project to ensure that it can be completed. My concern would be we get, you know, 3-4 years into the dredging, we've got half of an island completed, and the money dried up. What do we do at that point?
So the monetization of the project actually starts right at the beginning of the project. By year. Okay. So the project actually is revenue positive by year 4. Okay. So the idea that we don't do 8-12 years of project and start monetizing, it would never work, right? So, but that's where the phases come in. The early phases of this project help to fund that, and the revenue model, of course, you know, as we work with our funding sources, they're going to protect their investment as well. So that's where flexibility comes in. That's where we need to make sure that as we do this, we're not only providing a benefit, but we're doing it in a way where the project remains economically healthy and viable, and so that the completed restoration can occur. Those are questions, of course, that we're getting from state agencies. But Paul, we're happy to sit down with your city and talk through all of those things.
Can I add something, just real quick? I'd like to add something to that. My name's Randy Finley. I'm the project manager, and last thing I am is a politician or a lawyer. So I speak a little bit more directly. It would drive me crazy to wait 10 years to start building on something. So really what happens in this timeline, I think, is good. But there's also in the proposal, there's a dredging schedule. And that dredging schedule, basically, as we go through that, it shows what islands will be formed when the causeways get formed, and you're free to look at that. It shows total cubic yards of material that are going to be moved, how much biofiltration goes in, how much geotube goes in. It's very detailed, and really I like to think that Trump is going to help us get this thing done in 2 years, not 4, even though we've kind of shown 4. Past history shows 4 years to get an ESI approval completed is more normal, and we're hearing good sounds from Washington that time frame is being cut, especially for big jobs that make jobs for Americans, and this does all of those things. So when we start dredging, say in 2 years, I'm hoping it's less than that, within a year of that first part of dredging, that first cash portion of the project, which is in the Provo Bay area, becomes buildable. The decant time is less in Provo Bay because there's less groundwater, there's less buildup that needs to be done than there would be out in the middle of the lake. So we actually start monetizing or start construction within 3 years of the day that we get our EIS submitted, if it takes 2 years to start. And then each phase basically is released earlier. The causeways go across within about year 5, I believe. We're all the way across on the causeways. And we start building. We have to be able to monetize to pay for the rest of the dredging. We're not going out for $6 billion worth of investment. We need to draw in $6 billion worth of investment to do the project. But like Brian was explaining, we start seeing cash positive flow within year 4. So it's a very viable project. There heard some earlier questions.
And I know there are long-term investments. I mean, I used to work in the mining industry, and I worked with a mine where, you know, they sunk $2 billion into the development of that mine before they got a single ounce of ore out. So I understand long-term projects. I just wasn't sure, you know, how this was going to work out. So I can look deeper in financials. That certainly helps.
I'm glad you brought up mining, because this will be funded more like a mine than like a regular development, right? There is a long-term component of that.
I've been involved in many resort developments. I was on the ground floor of Whistler Resort, which in British Columbia was the 2010 Winter Olympics. And the thing is, for investors, this takes patient money, and they know that. And so, and one nice thing is that when you have the deep pockets paying for this, once they are in this for billions of dollars, you're not likely to just say, hey, we're going to go away. I mean, they're too deep invested, so they will keep going. And that's what we've seen. We've seen many things that end up being more expensive than they thought, but once they're in, they just keep going because they have to see the project through in order to recoup that in the beginning. So it does take patient money, and that's the trick. But one of the nice things about this is by doing these phase you can help leverage the monetization of Provo Bay for other areas on the lake, so that they help keep funding builds on itself.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate everything that you've brought to us today, the additional conversation. I think we could also continue to ask questions for probably about 4 more hours. It's a very interesting project to us. So please, everybody, get with them, ask any other questions you have, and we will move on at this point in our agenda. Thank you so very much, gentlemen. Okay. Eric.
Okay, report from the technical committee. Reed Price had to leave. He's our chair right now, but he wanted me to mention that the technical committee is ready and willing to dive into some of the questions that you might have on this project. At your request, I serve at the governing board's request for various projects. And then the other thing that we are working on right now is reviewing over the remainder of the year. We're reviewing the entire master plan of Utah Lake Commission, chunk by chunk, so that next year we will partner with Forestry Department of State Lands and do a renewal of that master plan.
Excellent, thank you. Update on water quality, Erica?
Sure. Just briefly, for those of you that are new to the group, the Division of Water Quality, in partnership with the Commission, has formed a Utah Lake Water Quality Steering Committee to guide some studies over the next 3 to 5 years to look at what the optimal water quality is for the lake and how we can achieve it. Largely related to nutrients, largely related to the algal blooms and other related issues on the lake. So the committee is formed. It's met twice. We have representation from several municipalities, Provo City, Springville, and Orem. We also have Timpano, the Special Service District, representing the PMTWs. I think we've had 2 very successful meetings, and I was pleased at the last meeting the group really wanted to expand the scope of the work from just focusing on the water quality of the lake to really look at watershed-wide and implementation costs. So the committee has agreed to stay on for perhaps 5 years instead of 3 years to take the analysis all the way to the end. We don't have enough funding to do all that work, so we're actively looking for partners to leverage our funding with $1 million from our water quality board to do these studies. So the next big effort this week and next is to seek a science panel that will be guiding the scientific studies that the committee to answer the questions that the committee identifies. So that's where we are. I'm very encouraged.
Any questions? Okay, excellent. Public relations, Sam.
I'll keep things brief. First, I just want to highlight on the campuses, because if some of you are new here, you may not know that your city requested one. I have Spanish Fork City, American Fork, Lehigh, Woodland Hills, Saratoga Springs, DNR, DWQ, CUWCD, Forestry Department of State Lands, Utah County, State Senate and House of Reps asked for one, and then Highland City. So at the end, I'll just go right back there and I can get you which one your city selected. I can take care of that. As to the public relations plan, we just wanted to highlight one thing briefly. We heard that the Merit Business School at BYU offers what's called an on-campus internship program. Basically, instead of summer internships, they're trying to allow their students to have internship experience during their winter and fall semesters as well. So we submitted an application and got a team of 5 students. So basically what happens is each of them puts in approximately 5 to 7 hours a week off-site for us. So just in their home or at school, they work on a variety of projects and they get credit hours in their semester for that project. So that team of interns we have working on a variety of topics. Primarily right now, they're working on helping us flesh out more in depth our public relations plans, crisis management plan, and our campaign for the summer. They'll also be helping us with developing our Adopt a Shoreline program, so they'll be helping with gaining more members to adopt those public access points and maintain them and keep them litter-free. They'll also be reviewing some of our events that we're doing, so our field trips, our Utah Lake Festival, the paddleboard program we did last summer. They're going to review and make suggestions for improvement, as well as suggest some new events potentially that we could be doing at the lake as well. So we're excited to be working with them, and we look forward to the results they're going to provide. Did you have a question?
Date for the lake festival so we can get it on our websites.
So as of right now, as it's been in the past, it's the first Saturday of June, which is June 2nd this year. As far as we're aware, the state park dredging won't interfere with that, and nor should it interfere with our field trips as well. If the project is ongoing, Geneva Rocks made concessions to allow us to use the facility still for our field trips. And that's all I have.
Thank you. So along those lines, we also have our governing board meeting scheduled for next year. Do you have any issues with any of the dates thus far? Not all. Take a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Should ask if anybody's opposed.
Thank you. Yes, anyone opposed? Thank you. Okay, any general comments, questions, concerns from the board? Excellent. So our next meeting then will be March 22nd across the street at our Public Justice Building, room 2500. And I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Hi.
Thank